Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5 and I thought I'd film a video about abuse test and cold steel proof test and my opinions of them and some points to remember. And I would like to point out that I do abuse test occasionally, and there's nothing wrong with abuse test. This all came about because I got a comment on my Cold Steel Tiger Karambit video, and I mentioned I like the Ormus Emerson better because I felt it was a superior knife. And someone left a comment saying that the Combat Karambit failed miserably on the abuse test, and the Steel Tiger did well, and that I made a nice commercial for Ormus Emerson, or for Emerson knives. And if you follow my channel for any length of time, you will know that my knife reviews are primarily cold steel. I've actually been accused of working for cold steel, and I've publicly mentioned in video that I think Ormus Emerson's knives are overpriced. And I mentioned that I love Ormus Emerson, but his knives are overpriced for what they are. And so, with all those disclaimers out of the way, I love abuse test videos. I love Cold Steel's proof test videos. I think they're entertaining. I think they're educational. But a liner lock and a frame lock are completely adequate for, let me say this, a properly made liner lock or frame lock is completely adequate for self-defense. And if you don't believe this, go on Cold Steel's website or their catalog and look up the Cold Steel Tie-Lite. The Cold Steel Tie-Lite is the only knife in their product line that has a liner lock, and and it's still there, and they still advertise it as a tactical knife. And if you watch Len Thompson talk about knife fighting, he will often mention that the human body is like spaghetti, that it's very easy to puncture and penetrate. And obviously he's talking about from the sternum below, not the actual sternum. But I've seen cheap knives pierce the sternum and kill someone. Not in person, but in police training videos. And I completely trust a properly made liner lock or frame lock. Are they as strong as a triad lock? No. But I think the triad lock, what it really comes into its own is with large photos, because there's a lot more leverage being put on the pivot. But in general, I like the triad lock, but I don't feel like I'm carrying an inferior knife if I'm carrying the Ultinashi no Ken, which, for those of you who watched my last EDC bag review, know that the Ultinashi no Ken is my backup self-defense knife. I keep it in my EDC bag for in case I leave the house without a tactical knife, which happens on rare occasion, but it does happen. So I sleep in, I'm late for something, I go into town, I'm like, oh crap, I don't have a tactical knife. The Ultinashi no Ken is my backup for that. And I feel that the Emerson Combat Karambit is completely adequate for self-defense. Flesh is very easy to cut, and keep in mind with a floating Karambit, it doesn't have an outer edge, so you're not really using the spine as much. So you're putting a lot of positive pressure on the pivot, and I'm not saying you're not going to put negative pressure on it, but in general you're putting positive pressure on it. And to me, the proof test videos is educational, it's reassuring, and it's a outward statement of quality. It's not. Let's see, how can I say this? It's not. I'm coming from a loss of words. Forgive me. To me, abuse tests are a reassurance, but it's not necessary. It's nice to know that my folding knife can chop down a tree if I need it to, but will my folding knife ever be used to chop down a tree? No. And when I say tree, I'm talking about something like that. It's nice to know, but it's not really practical. If you're in the military and you need a combat utility knife or fighting knife, I think abuse tests are completely valid. But keep in mind the K-bar, which is a relatively weak knife, was completely adequate for ever since World War II. The K-bar has been doing its job for a long time. And, just because something is better doesn't mean the things that came before it are inadequate. It might make them obsolete, but it doesn't mean they don't work. So that's the main point I want to make. I'm not against abuse tests. I do abuse tests on my channel. They're educational, they're entertaining, but and I've seen people do this on abuse tests. I've seen people baton through brick, and I cannot name a single instance where I need to baton through a brick. But it's just cool to know that my knife can do that without breaking. So just because something fails an abuse test doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad knife or it's not an adequate knife for the job. In fact, I've owned a cold steel knife that was supposed to be relatively strong. It wasn't a tactical knife, but they said it had a significant lock on it, or an adequate lock on it. They advertised it as being a blockable knife, and the lock was complete crap. You could push the knife unlocked with your thumb. You can grab the knife like this. By the way, this was the Cold Steel Eland, and you could actually push the spine of the blade with your thumb and bust the lock on it. And we even got one that we got an Eland, and we were cutting through cardboard, and then the pivot or the blade extended up past the pivot. Let's see. We're cutting, and the blade pivoted up when you were actually putting positive pressure on the blade. And we contacted Cold Steel, told them about it. You know what they did? They discontinued the knife. The Kudu for some reason did well, but the Eland did not. So, abuse tests have their place. They're educational, but just because a knife fails an abuse test doesn't mean that it's worthless. So that's it. I hope you got something from this video. I will continue to do Battle of the Buoys and different things like opening up cans of beans with a knife. It's good to know. But it's not the argument end all. It's not the end all factor that determines if a knife is better than the other. And keep in mind, the reason why I like the Emerson Combat Karambit over the Steel Tiger or the Tiger Claw is because that it is a liner lock and it doesn't have spring pressure on the knife. With triad locks, slip joints, and back locks, it has a detent. The knife will slam shut by itself. With a frame lock or a liner lock, it doesn't have that. So the problem with the Tiger Claw is that if you fail to open it up completely, engage the lock, and you put your fingers in the way, it has the ability to slam back on your fingers, what actually happened to me. And to me, that's no good. Now, I've modified my Tiger Claw, and it functions better now, but there's no arguing that the Emerson functions better or is more user-friendly. You can't argue that point. I will publicly say that the Tiger Claw has a better edge on it. I will say that it's stronger, but it's not as user-friendly. And that's it. I'm Satsu5, and I'm out.